Hey everyone, hope you're doing well and welcome back to yet another tier list video. If you've watched these before, then you should know that these are not your regular S to F tier lists based on a patch and what champions are OP or not on that current patch. These are tier lists that categorizes champions into certain playstyles for specific lanes. The main reason for this type of tier list is that many of us have a favorite champion that we enjoy playing because of the playstyle. And then when we want to find something new, it's not always easy to find something that plays in a similar way, and this tier list is made to help with that problem. So far we have covered top and jungle if you want to check those out, and now we will cover mid lane. Now I'm gonna be totally honest here. This is the most difficult one to make, and it's for two reasons. One, almost every champion class in the game can be played mid lane, because only two things are required. You either have decent wave clear or you have decent roaming. If you have both, then you are a really good mid lane champion. You don't necessarily have to trade and damage other champions because the nature of the lane has changed a lot in the last 2-3 years. And the second reason is there are too many playstyles. What I've done is that I have simplified as much as I think is possible, but you will find champions in this list that you could argue belong to more than one playstyle. And I want you to let me know in the comments below if you disagree with a certain champion. We are not gonna cover every champion. The champions you see here at the bottom are champions that traditionally play mid lane, and champions who in the past have had a presence in the mid lane in low elo, high elo, and even pro play. So don't come at me in the comments with where is my AP lethality Xin Zhao mid. That's not a mid lane champion in my book, but I could be wrong. Who knows? Anyways, let's get into it. In the first bracket, we have playable marksmen. These are AD carry champions that have been played in the mid lane in the past and still work in certain matchups. Some scale well, some are lane bullies, and some are counter picks. Pretty much all of them are countered by a jungler with a brain and one CC spell, or simply just playing against assassins. Are they the best champions to play mid? Not really, but I'll include them anyways. All of them pretty much lose versus a Twisted Fate with a gold card and a Nunu jungle with a snowball. But let's get into it. Alright, here we have the AD carries, and as always we have some points to discuss. Now Caitlyn has very good range, she has two playstyles in lethality or crit, and she always have wave priority, where she can push the lane faster than the enemy champion, in most cases that she gets picked into. Obviously she's not going to outpush certain champions like Anivia or Victor, but in the matchups that you pick Caitlyn into, you should have push priority. Then you have Lucian. Lucian is very much a lane bully. You queue the enemy through the wave and you chip them down for an all-in combo later. Then you have Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa is a scaling duelist. She has good poke, but she's very weak into all-in. Later in the game, she plays exactly like Kai'Sa in the bot lane would. You either go AP or AD, it's your choice. Jhin is not really seen in the mid lane anymore, but when he was first released, he was a very popular mid lane pick, and some even still play him to this day. He has good poke, but he has trash wave clear, and she's very weak into all-in. Ashe is the original AD carry mid lane. Many people don't even know that Ashe used to be a mid laner, but now she is a bot laner. She is a lane bully if you go Hail of Blades, you can go W poke with Arcane Comet, and she has very good picks with her ult, and because you are mid lane and you have a charge or two of your E, you can very easily scout the enemy jungler and make sure that you can't really get ganked. And then you have Sivir. Sivir is pretty much a wave clear queen. Just like Caitlyn, you have two playstyles. You either go lethality or crit. Now lethality was nerfed earlier, like not this year but the year before. But with the new items that are coming in, lethality Sivir might make a comeback. Otherwise, you just build crit as a normal AD carry. You have wave priority because you have really good wave clear, You have good poke with your Q, it's hard to all-in you because of your spell shield, and she's very good with melee champions because of the movement speed that she can provide them. Varus. Mid lane Varus has been something that is played in solo queue, high elo, low elo, and even pro play. You go lethality, you have very good poke, and insane gank setup with your jungler. If you ult the enemy carry, most of the time they die, even if you're not the one killing them, because of the CC that you provide. And then you have Vayne, who's very much a counter pick only in the mid lane. She takes a long time to scale up, and she's not a very good pick. But if the enemy team for some reason has a tank in the mid lane that is very low impact, you can technically pick Vayne and counter that champion and outscale them, but it's a very unlikely. Now next up we have the lane lock champions. Now you might ask, what is lane lock? As a mid laner you want to have map impact, and to have that you must push the wave first, and then you can roam without losing anything. These champions are really durable. They push really fast and they are hard to kill, and they will smash your turret if you can't keep up with them. They don't have to interact with the other laner, they just care about the wave and the tower. And here we have them. Sion, Garen, Tryndamere, Graves and Morgana. Now Sion has a playstyle where he's either inting or not, where he is consistently dying at the enemy tower, chipping it down with his passive. You can also go a normal lane bully playstyle where you just out-tank the enemy. You want to build Heartsteel because it's currently the best scaling item on him in my opinion, and you want to run Demolish in every game. You are tanky enough to survive most combos that a mid laner can throw at you at equal level. You have very good wave clear where you just walk up and E and Q the wave, and most of the time you can take the turret while the enemy laner is still clearing the minion wave. Then you have Garen. Garen's biggest tools in lane. Doran's shield, his passive and second wind. You sustain for days. Nobody can really out-sustain you in lane as a normal mid laner. You clear the wave very fast, and if you get an opportunity to hit the tower, you can almost guarantee a plate every time if you have Demolish. And then you have Tryndamere, who is the exact same as Garen, except for the fact that he sustains with his Q and his Fury. Tryndamere has a bit more kill pressure than Garen, as you can consistently spin on the enemy laner, damage them, and then out-sustain them immediately with your Fury and your Q. If you leave Tryndamere alone in lane, he will take your turret very fast. And then you have Graves, which is somewhat unusual but has been played before. You one-shot the wave with your Q, you have fleet footwork for sustain, and you can even build more sustain and just perma-push the lane. You have decent kill pressure, but at the same time you are easier to kill than the other champions in this category. And lastly we have Morgana, who is very good as a counter pick versus heavy CC, and she's very good at holding the lane in the middle or even pushing the lane herself. She has really good roams if her summoner spells are up, and you can play something like TP Ghost, TP Flash, and you can look for roams for your bindings or your ultimates and set the other lanes ahead. Now you do fall off as Morgana mid. That is something that you actually have to think about. Next up we have the Shove, Wave and Roam champions. We call these the classics. This is what mid laners usually want to do, but these champions generally don't care about perfect CS scores. They are fine with losing a bit of CS. They win the game by causing chaos in the side lanes and in the jungle. They snowball really hard with kills and can become impossible to stop, unless the player starts making bad decisions. Then they fall off and they lose. And here we have Katarina, Nocturne, Talon, Twisted Fate, Nunu. Yes, I said Nunu. Kiana, Riven and Pantheon. Now, with Nocturne, what you want to think about is shoving the wave. You want to have push priority. So Tiamat Rush is something that mid lane Nocturne usually do. You want to build lethality because that enables your one-shot playstyle in comparison to the Stride Breaker build that jungle Nocturne does. That is more about tanking and being hard to kill while you still have enough damage to kill people. Mid lane Nocturne wants to one-shot people. You are very much a duelist in playstyle, as you want to consistently fight, And if you're not really consistently getting kills, you can always look to split push because you have ways of entering a fight from a side lane with your ultimate. Next up we have Katarina. Now AP, AD and tank are all viable playstyles, but I think AP is the one that deals the least amount of damage right now, so most people are looking at tank Katarina and AD Katarina. Kat is very overwhelming once ahead. You might think that it's only her ultimate that's an issue and you save CC for that, but with just her base kit, she has enough damage to one-shot people, especially with an item and level lead. And then you have Talon. Talon has the greatest map movement in the game. The only one that comes close is maybe Kayn. Talon can play bruiser or assassin, he can look to kill people or he can look to split push and then flank with his ultimate. And then you have Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate looks to stay safe in lane, he might trade a little bit with a blue card or a red card, but later on you will one-shot the wave and you only look at getting your lanes ahead. Try not taking all the gold as Twisted Fate, because even though you deal a decent amount of damage, your AP ratios are not really the best. And if you build full damage and you take all the gold, you will fall off eventually. And then Nunu. This champion in the mid lane is 99% people trolling, but it does have an actual player base. People actually play mid Nunu. Now Nunu doesn't really have the best wave clear. What he wants to do is have the wave on the enemy side and he wants to snowball either bot or top. The thing with Nunu is, and I recommend this strategy to everyone, people pick this to troll in 99% of cases. So even in champ select, I will pick my champion just as usual, I will click the X on the client and I will hover the exit confirm button on my client and I will watch the summoner spells of Nunu. If he changes them last second to ghost cleanse, I will dodge the game. If he continues with flash ignite or flash TP or any other combination, I will let the game play out. Because this champion is so haunted by people who want to troll that it's very hard to take it seriously. But he does have an actual player base. And then you have Qiyana, who's probably the best assassin for jungle fights, because her ultimate causes chaos in the jungle. It's very thick and hard to escape from most carries. It's also very difficult to engage on Qiyana because she can always touch grass and become invisible and basically waste a lot of time and wait for her cooldowns to come back up. And then you have Riven. Riven is an all-time classic. People who like Faker would remember that he is one of the OG Riven players in the mid lane. She has good laning phase, a lot of dashes, a lot of damage, but she has no sustain. If you can consistently dodge skill shots on Riven, you will have a good time in lane. If you can't, then you will have to recall multiple times. Pantheon, lane bully. You try to find all-in windows by constantly spamming Q on your opponent. If they are low enough, you kill them. If you find the ability to roam, you can do that with your ult in two ways. You either push the wave, ult bot lane or top lane, or you simply push the wave, walk to the lane, do your deed there, and then you ult back at your tower, because the opponent will try to push the wave back to you and damage your tower, and they will almost always be visible on your tower trying to take a tower plate, which can give you an easy kill. And then up next we have the big team fighters. These are champions with an ultimate or a kit that brings them really deep into team fights. They don't stay at the side of the fight and throw spells. They have really high impact in the core, in the middle of a big fight. All of these champions have the possibility of starting a big fight on their own. Let's take a look. Alright, here we have Fiddlesticks, Malphite, Kennen, Swain, Brand, Rumble and Nico. And let's go through them. Fiddlesticks is not as popular mid lane as old Fiddlesticks was, but he still has great poke, good sustain and one of the best ults in the game. You deal a lot of damage as Fiddlesticks, and because you are mid lane and you have more access to XP, you become online much faster than jungle Fiddlesticks. And then you have Malphite, who is either AP or tank. You have really high combo damage as Malphite, but you are easily counterable because your entire kit is flashable. If you're ulting an enemy carry and they flash away and you're AP Malphite, then you don't have any tankiness to survive and you just die right there. If they have items like Hex Drinker or Zhonya's, it becomes really hard for you to make the game-ending plays that you pick AP Malphite for. So you need to be a bit versatile in lane. Always look at the items that the enemy team is buying, and if you notice that the enemy team is getting tankier, you need to shift more into a tank playstyle. Then you have Kennen. Kennen is not as good mid as he is top for bullying reasons, but he still works. You have safe laning phase because of your E movement speed, you have great all-in, you have good damage, and you have really good roams as Kennen. And then Swain, you have a great laning phase, you are hard to kill, you are impossible to ignore in teamfights, because even though his damage is slow, his damage will ramp up as the teamfight goes longer and longer. And then you have Brand. Everyone knows Brand for his damage, but he has a really good item synergy. In my opinion, he is the best user in the game of Rylai's, because his passive proc can apply it on more people than he intentionally means to damage. He sucks versus divers that can get on top of him very quickly, and his damage is a bit delayed. Even though you might hit W or Q or E, a lot of Brand's damage is stacked into his passive, and that takes time to proc. And then Rumble. As Rumble, you have great laning phases versus melee champions, less so against ranged. You have great damage, you have a really good ultimate for teamfights, but you suck versus hard CC because you're not the fastest champion in the game and you don't have any mobility options. His playstyle is a bit telegraphed for mid lane. Let's say the scenario of Rumble activating his Flame Spitter in lane. You know that he wants to damage you with it, and in order to do so he needs to walk straight at you, which can make it really easy for a champion like, let's say, Nico to land a snare on him and land a Q and poke him out of lane. But a good Rumble has good enough movement to circumvent that. And lastly, we have Nico. Nico has great laning, great wave clear, really good damage, and the thing about Nico that makes her really hard to play against right now is her surprise ult. Now, while Nico does deal a lot of damage in teamfights, without Rocket Belt or Flash, it is kinda difficult for her to get really deep into a fight and hit a really good ultimate. So she is a bit mobility capped in that sense, but a good Nico will always have the correct timing to enter a fight. Next up we have the divers, champions who once the team fight starts cannot be ignored, because they either bring a lot of CC, a lot of burst damage, or a lot of consistent DPS that can shred the entire team. They are in 99% of cases hard-hitting melee champions. Let's take a look at them. And here we have Aatrox, Akali, Diana, Echo, Jarvan, Irelia, Sylas, Yone, Yasuo, Camille, and K'Sante. Aatrox, more of a pick in pro play in the mid lane and high elo when it's strong. You have really good laning phases versus melee champions, you are extremely hard to all in, and you have two playstyles, either lethality or bruiser. Akali is very hard to kill because of the shroud and her E and her many dashes. She has really good damage, but her wave clear sucks in the early game. As you get more points in your Q and more AP or AD, you actually start one-shotting waves and it becomes a non-issue later. You have build diversity as Akali. You can build basically every AP item, and you can also dive into some of the more bruiser AD items as well. Then you have Diana. You are the exact same as Akali, same exact playstyle. You want to dash in and one-shot a target or just do a lot of damage, but you are more of a split push threat than Akali is. If you don't know what I mean, go into practice tool, get full build on Diana and go hit a tower, you will see exactly what I mean. She's straight up one-shot towers. Then you have Echo. Safe laning phase, decent wave clear, you are a split push threat like Diana is, and you can be quite overwhelming once you are ahead, because you are hard to kill and you are very slippery with your movement speed and your E. And then you have Jarvan. Now Jarvan is not really played in the mid lane anymore, but what's good about Jarvan is that he has a surprise all-in. And what I mean by that is everyone knows what it's like to be ganked by Jarvan jungle. You sort of understand what his engage range is, but once you lane versus him, you have to walk up for CS, and then you are always in range of him, which can make it really easy for him to surprise you with an all-in engage. You can go lethality or bruiser as Jarvan, you either one-shot a target or you become very durable, and you have good poke damage with your Q spam. Now Irelia. Top and mid Irelia are two very different things. In mid lane, Irelia is more of a burst champion. You can have some mana issues, but the meme about Irelia is once she gets Vamp Scepter and Recurve Bow, you call that full build Irelia, because now you can't really push her out of lane, unless she runs out of mana. It can be difficult for Irelia to find kills, because the lane is very short and she doesn't have a lot of space to run people down. But if you misplay positionally versus Irelia, you will die every single time. Irelia has the option of going into a split push mode where she pushes the wave and tries to find a flank with her ultimate on your carries, so beware of that. And then you have Sylas. Sylas has very bad wave clear throughout the entire game, even though it gets better later on. But he has one of the best extended fights in the entire game because of his sustain with his W. Sylas is also a very good counter pick because if the enemy team is not very aware and they pick high impact ultimates like the one in the team fight presence in the tier below, you can pick Sylas and have a more impact because you use most ults better than the original ult casters, except for special cases like Darius. We don't really get the passive stacks, so you don't really deal as much damage, but as Sylas you know what ults you want to steal and which ones to avoid. And then you have Yone. Yone's laning phase is extremely straightforward. Q on the minions, try to land a tornado, and poke with your W. Yone has a lot of safety tools in this kit. If he gets ganked and he doesn't want to take the fight, he can always ult away. You have decent scaling, you have a good laning phase, and you have great all-in as Yone. And for Yasuo, it's the same as Yone, but you don't really have the same safety tools. Your W is just better versus projectile champions, and there's a lot of them in the mid lane. Think of Vel'Koz, think of champions like Twisted Fate. You counter their entire kit, at least once you have Wind Wall up. And then you have Camille. Now Camille is difficult in the mid lane because she doesn't have the same access to walls as she does in the top lane. But it's still doable. Your wave clear sucks and you want to rush Tiamat as soon as possible if you want to have any chance of contesting the push. But in reality you want to roam because you have great all-ins with your E and your R. And then K'Sante. K'Sante is very good versus low damage mid laners. Only pick if you lack frontline. You have very bad wave clear, but once you get going with Iceborne Gauntlet, it's very hard to get away from K'Sante. And now we move on to the zone control playstyle. These champions have kits that makes it very hard for people to bring the fight to them. Imagine there is a Baron or Dragon Soul fight and you have to move through these champions in order to get to the objective. They are all high damage, but they are very squishy and they like to play on the outside of a fight, unlike the big teamfight presence champions that are face first all in. Let's take a look. Alright, here we have Taliyah, Zoe, Lux, Heimerdinger, Gangplank, Zyra and Victor. Taliyah, great laning, very good versus dash champions because you can stop them in their track. She's very hard to engage on for that reason, and she has the ability to split the fight and isolate targets. If you find her wall between the front line and the back line, you can isolate either one and have your team choose on who to engage on. Zoe, great laning phase. You want to find angles to land a bubble and kill the target. People want to get close to you, but what they don't realize is it becomes very easy for Zoe to land her E if you are basically on top of her. In big team fights, however, it can be difficult to find the angles for a long range Q. If you do, and you hit a long range Q, it's almost certainly always a kill. And then we have Lux. Lux is the exact same as Zoe, but a bit easier. You try to land a binding for a big ult combo. She has the lowest nuke ult cooldown in the game because I think at her standard build her ult gets down to like 19 seconds. On top of that, she might have the easiest wave clear in the game once you reach the later stages. Because of your low ult cooldown and the minions spawning every 30 seconds, you always have an ult to clear the minion wave. Heimerdinger makes great use of items, just like Brand, to make life really tough for melee champions. items such as Rylai's and Leandri's. Turrets and the big grenade makes teamfighting hard for the enemy, and on top of that he has really high objective damage. Heimerdinger at 3 or 4 items can pretty much solo Baron, and with a jungler helping, you can sneak into the jungle, do Baron very fast and win the game that way. And as Gangplank, you have great laning phase, you have the options of going lethality or crit, even though crit is pretty much always better. You want to look for ults in the side lanes to impact the map, and later you don't have to know every barrel combo. The only one that you need consistently, I would say, is the triple barrel combo, because then you can reach targets that are way outside of your Q range. Then you have Zyra. Zyra is the same as Heimerdinger but better versus dive champions, because she can always ult on top of herself and basically always do a lot of damage even though she dies. The plants are a melee champion's worst nightmare because they do a lot of damage and they apply items such as Leandri's and Rylai's as well. Victor, great laning phase, good wave clear, and good item synergy just like Zyra and Heimerdinger and Brand. On top of that, people don't really respect your ultimate damage and your movement speed once you upgrade your Q. It becomes really hard to kill Victor, who has access to his Q movement speed, his slows and his W stun field, on top of having a high damage ultimate that chase you. And next up we have the support champions. These are great if your team picks a carry in every role and they all play a selfish style. Imagine you have Quinn, Graves, Draven and Pyke. There is no shielding, no peel, no healing. It's a doomed team comp and most likely a dodge in higher elos. However, these champions in the mid lane can add that support value to the team and make it winnable because of their kit. They can't carry games alone in 99% of cases, and if you pick these, you 100% play for the team. And in this category we have Karma, Zilean, Galio, Seraphine and Ornn. Karma, great early damage with her mantra Q. Most people don't expect her to hit that hard, especially people who don't really play bot lane, AD carries, you know what I'm talking about. But her value comes later once she can provide movement speed and shields to a big carry. And the same with Zilean. Zilean has very low damage in the beginning, but it ramps up in the mid game. He is probably the hardest champion in the game to CS on, but the movement speed value later is insane and the ability to revive someone, so it's worth going through that pain in the early game. Galio deals insane amount of damage himself, but in design he is a support champion. He can wave clear, but he's great at supporting a champion that dives in. Imagine you have a combo of Nocturne or Jarvan jungle who engages deep, and then you ult on top of them. You are pretty much always a support structure, funny as a statue, for a great team fight. And then you have Seraphine. Seraphine is basically Sona on steroids. You have good damage, good poke, and you provide just enough CC and shielding and heals to help the team get over the finish line. Her damage is not something that you can underestimate either. And then you have Ornn. This is more of a pick and pro play, but it is also possible for you to play in high and low elo. You are pretty much unkillable in lane if you know what you're doing. You have insane gank setup with your jungler, and you roam very well with your ultimate. You have decent wave clear. Mid laners without TP can't keep up with Ornn's tempo in lane, since he can build items in lane and out pressure the opponent. You are tanky enough as Ornn to survive basically any mid lane combo, and in that way you are unkillable. The only way you die is if you mess up or if you get ganked by multiple people. And then we have one of the best solo queue categories for mid lane in my opinion. It's called anti-dive, but it can also be called anti-fun. A lot of players pick champions that rely on getting kills in lane, or that want to dive on top of champions to kill them. You think of Akali, LeBlanc, Katarina, Fizz. Many people consider these fun champions, and that's why they are so popular. All the champions in this category, however, are really good at dealing with those types of champions. Some counter AP champions, some counter AD, some are good versus both, but the main reason you pick them is because of the tools they have to deny all-in engages, and they can even engage themselves. And here we have Anivia, Lissandra, Malzahar, Cho'Gath, Gragas, Renekton, Urgot, Set and Vex. Anivia, great laning and decent early game. Hits like a truck later, her slows and stuns and the wall makes her really hard to dive on, and the egg passive can deny all-ins in the early game. Then you have Lissandra, great wave clear and one of the best melee champions deniers in the game. Your slow and your roots while being mobile overall makes her really hard to deal with. You are a nightmare in teamfights for melee champions. Then you have Malzahar. Malzahar doesn't really interact in lane, you perma-push the wave, your silence is great versus channel ultimates like Katarina, and in worst case scenario you press R and you suppress them while your team or you with your own damage kill them. You can force a QSS tax on Malzahar where the enemy has to spend 1300 gold on an item to get out of your ult, and that's 1300 gold not spent on getting more damage. And then you have Cho'Gath. Basically the same as Malzahar but melee. You have great sustain in lane with your passive, you have good wave clear with your Q and your W and even Everfrost if you build that, and you have decent amount of damage. On most squishies, if you land his Q, you can walk up and hit your W and one E auto attack, and you can ult them, and that's pretty much always guaranteed to be a kill. Gragas. E-spam Gragas is a melee champion's worst nightmare, especially if they don't have any dashes. You can wave clear pretty good as Gragas, you sustain very good with his passive, and you're hard to kill with phase rush. Renekton. Watch the enemy team pick Yasuo or AP Katarina and go PTA Renekton. It's unplayable unless they go full defenses, in which case they don't carry the game at all. They can never be in melee range versus Renekton and not be in risk of dying. You have good sustain, you have good wave clear, you have good mobility. Renekton is a very solid mid lane pick that is very underplayed. And then you have Urgot, same as Renekton but he's ranged. Most mid laners are unaware of how much damage Urgot can produce or how tanky he is with his E-shield. If they ever walk into E range, which they might not know how long that range is, they are most likely going to die. Then you have Set. Same as Renekton, he's an early lane bully versus melee champions. You can kill any ranged champion that walks into his range. He is very hard to kill and he has a great sustain. Most people who get hit by a high grit W are going to be like, what the fuck just happened to me? And then you have Vex. Vex can be in multiple playstyles, but I've put her here because she has good wave clear and damage, and melee champions have a tough time getting on her with her constant fears. She can take over the game with the ult resets, and she's very hard to play against if you're someone like Yasuo or Aurelia, champions that do in fact want to dive in on top of people. We also have the scaling for late game category that consists of champions who are really good with a lot of golden items. They range from DPS mages to low cooldown ability spamming or simply high damage nukes every few seconds. These can take some time to get going, but they have decent laning phases and great tools to carry games. And here we have Cassiopeia, Corki, Veigar, Aurelion Sol, Ryze, Kayle, Castellan and Karthus. Cassiopeia can be an early lane bully, you scale like a monster, you're very good versus dive champions that you can surprise with an ult, and because of your W miasma, getting a good placement of W can mean that the melee champion has no answers anymore. They can't use their dashes and they will most likely die. Corki. Unfortunately, pro play haunts Corki as he's constantly in a perma-nerfed state, but he's very good if you know how to play him. You have good damage as Corki, you have good poke, and it's generally very hard to itemize against Corki because he is an AD champion that builds AD items but he deals magic damage. And then you have Veigar. Veigar is weaker now than he was 3-4 years ago. He doesn't hit as hard anymore, and his E and his W are way harder to use. However, in low elo, he's still a fine champion for damage. You pretty much always have the ability of killing a carry with a Q ult or W ult, or if it's late enough in the game, just a straight up ult. you pick Veigar for damage still to this day. Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol is a champion that is very hard to punish in lane. He has a very uninteractive playstyle, similar to Malzahar, where he just perma clears the wave. He comes really online at 2 items and above. If you have Liandry's and Rylai's, melee champions find it very difficult to deal with you. It's very hard to outdamage him, and if you have good enough CC on your team, you can take over the team fight and nobody can really touch you. Then you have Ryze. Good scaling, good damage, decent tankiness, because you have the option of going items like Frozen Heart, and mana gets converted into damage for you, so it's still good. And you're very much a split push threat or a flank threat with your ultimate. Ryze is not really played, and similar to Corki, he is haunted by pro play. Kayle. Kayle has many playstyles. AD, AP, on hit. Kayle can do a lot. She is hard in lane in higher elos, but very doable in lower elos. You just have to constantly think about not really fighting and just scale. Get to level 6, get to ranged form, focus only on minions, and once you reach level 11 you hit another tier in power, and if you can get to 16 you have a really good chance of winning the game. Then you have Kassadin. The current rune system gives Kassadin a lot of tools to survive the lane versus almost anyone, and with tools I mean stuff like second wind and bone plating, stuff that makes it hard to all in Kassadin and kill him in the early game. Doran's shield is available for him in hard poke lanes, and he wants to look to scale. You want to take smart fights as Kassadin. Your level 16 Kassadin is not auto win anymore, you are very much nerfed, but if you're a smart player you can make Kassadin work into almost any matchup. And then we have Karthus. Nobody really plays Karthus mid anymore, because you get double ganked by jungler and support constantly. But with the map changes that are coming in for season 14, who knows, you might have an easy time to scale up, you can farm from range and harass when possible, and you always pretty much look to ult side lanes and kill steal, because just like jungle Karthus, mid lane Karthus scales extremely well with gold, and even if you die you still have insane value in a teamfight where you can press your ult and land some Qs. But sometimes we like to stay far away and poke the enemy, so they can't really take any good fights. That's where the next category come in. The long range poke champions. Low cooldown ability spamming from afar away. Rewarding to play correctly, but they all suck versus heavy engaged champions. Let's take a look. We have Ezreal, Ziggs, Xerath, Vel'Koz, Kog'Maw. Ezreal has times around the year where his AP builds get very popular on him, and you can harass in lane, you farm up and you spam Qs on the enemy team. You have very good damage, usually bad wave clear, but your poke hits really hard. Especially if you can land the full EWQ auto, then they're pretty much always in that kill range. Ziggs, same as Ezreal, but tower taking power is very underrated. As long as you're mindful of your distance, it's very hard to die as Ziggs, even against some assassins. And then you have Xerath. He is the same as Ziggs, but you hit harder as Xerath, but it's easier to mess up on, since throwing Qs slow you down and you can get engaged on. You look to impact lanes early with your ult, similar to a Karthus, but it is way more difficult to play. But you have defensive tools to help you in your E and your W against people who want to get on top of you. And then next up we have Vel'Koz. He's probably the best team fighter within this category. Good laning phase if you can position well, you can be a bit mana hungry, and you want to find angles in fights to proc your passive and find a good ult position. Nobody can really outdamage you in a team fight as long as you position well and use your ultimate in a very good way. And then Kog'Maw. AP Kog'Maw with E maxed, who one-shots minion waves and becomes an artillery cannon. Kog'Maw in the mid lane is very much also haunted by pro play because it is a nerfed playstyle, but it's still very possible. Just have in mind you are very mana hungry as your ultimate stacks keep getting higher and higher, and you pretty much need to have access to blue buff. Now, in some games, the enemy team relies on one carry to win them the game, and we need to kill that carry. Some champions deal a lot of area of effect AoE damage, but these are really good single target damage champions, extremely high burst, and on top of that they are very slippery and hard to kill because of their movement. And here we have LeBlanc, Zed, Fizz, Ahri and Nefari. Now, LeBlanc is very difficult in some matchups and she is easier in others. If you can reach 2 items before the carry, you have a good shot of winning the game alone. You can split push even though her AD playstyle has been nerfed. You can still push a minion wave and look to flank people and find engages that they don't really expect. You do have a lot of counter matchups that do very well into you, so make sure to use your ban correctly and get rid of champions that you find you really struggle against. Champions like Lissandra, for example, is always picked into LeBlanc because she has an easy time of CCing her and holding her down. But it's not impossible for LeBlanc to win that matchup, it depends on how good you are on her. And then you have Zed. The current Zed scales for mid game with Hydra and haste items. You look to farm up and you poke early game with your Q. If you're strong, you can look to find kills. If you're a bit weaker, you can look to split push. Fizz, same as Zed, but he has easier kill windows. Look for people who overextend and use your ult to set up easy kills for your team, or kill them yourself. It can be a bit tough in the early game because you don't really have wave clear and your dash is also your main damage ability. So if you use your E to escape, you don't really have any damage to offer. Ahri, unless ahead, you don't actually have one-shot damage versus anyone, but you are very safe in lane. You should be able to farm in every matchup and just look for plays to make. Ahri can kill people alone if she has an item advantage or a level advantage, but you will notice as the time goes on in the game, people around you will start to be able to survive. You don't really deal as much damage as everyone else. Your power is very much in your pick potential. You try to ult, find an angle, land a charm, and even if you land your Q and you bring them down to maybe 10% HP, your team should be able to finish them off for you. Then you have Naafiri, same as Ahri, but lethality items come online earlier than mage items, so you should have a chance to kill people unless you are really far behind. You have some extreme nightmare matchups like Aurelia, who can dash on top of your dogs and dash onto you, but if you position well and you pick your all-in windows, you should find success as Nefari. Now let's talk about the laning phase, and champions that excel at getting leads in that early stage of the game. These champions got the tools to shove waves fast, be hard to kill, and they offer really good damage and scaling in multiple forms. In DPS, in poke, in burst, in all-in, in split push, but all of that gets set up in the early laning phase. The majority of these picks are also staples in pro play, and it's for that specific reason. They are very good in lane. And here we have Tristana, Syndra, Orianna, Jace, and Akshan. Tristana secures push priority in almost every lane. You don't want to leave Tristana alone with a tower because that tower will be gone very quickly. You have very good damage output because you are still an AD carry and you're getting solo XP and a lot of gold. You have good safety tools with your jump and your knockback ult, and you scale very well into the game. Syndra, you have damage, you have poke, you have all-in combos. But your laning phase is very important because you need to gain a lead. You have good wave clear and you are hard to kill, but if you miss position, you will most likely die. Then you have Orianna, same as Syndra, but more team oriented. You have more combos to think about because other people can help you apply your ultimate. You have decent wave clear, your movement speed is a bit underrated, and people really underestimate her lane bully potential because of her empowered autos. Then you have Jace, similar to top lane, but more all-in potential. His poke is a bit more effective in mid lane because mid laners usually don't have the same access to sustain in their kits that top lane bruisers have. You need a lead on Jace in the laning phase, otherwise you scale at the same time as the enemy champions, and if you don't have a lead, you don't really hit as hard. As Jace, you can look to split push and create pressure that way, but you need to be in the team fights, you need to land EQs on the carries, you need to be a threat. And lastly we have Akshan. Now Akshan haven't really taken off in pro play, but who knows what the next season might bring. Your strength is in the laning phase. You have good early levels, you want to create map pressure with your roams, you can look to split push, you can look to flank, you can look to surprise people. That is what Akshan excels at. And just like the other videos of this type, we have a bracket called highest return on investments. These are opinion based and you might disagree with them, but I personally feel like these 3 champions give you the most value for the time you put into them. All of them have tools to take over the game with, all have solid laning phases and clear power curves. You can make big plays with all of them and either pull your team out of a big hole or drag your team over the finish line by simply carrying with them. And in this bracket we have Azir, Annie and Vladimir. Azir has the most overloaded kit in the mid lane. He has tools to play any matchup. You have escapes, you have poke, you have DPS, you have anything that you want in a mid laner. You scale like a monster. You can use basically any rune. You can use Hail of Blades to be a lane bully, you can use Comment to poke people, you can use Airy to poke people, you can go Conqueror to deal with tanks, you can go Lethal Tempo to deal or be a DPS character. You basically scale like a monster with Azir, as long as you know how to play him. You can play an offensive playstyle or a defensive playstyle depending on what you need. And then you have Annie. Solid laning phase, can be low eco, and that means even if she doesn't have a lot of gold, she still provides value in that most people disrespect her engage. As long as Annie has access to her flash, she can always find a play that can end the game or give you a comeback angle. And once ahead, if Annie has flash and she has an item up on everyone, she can pretty much wipe her team on her own. And lastly we have Vladimir. Hardest scaler in the game outside of the champions that don't stack forever, stuff like Thresh, Senna, Nasus, Veigar. As long as you are mechanically decent on him and you know what to expect in terms of when to engage, when to use what, how to approach a fight, you can carry games with him. Your team fights are very good because you deal an insane amount of damage and you heal a lot, and if you can find a flank where the enemy team is not ready for you, nobody can have a decent enough response to play against you. Now, these champions can be placed in other tiers, like Azir for example. If this tier did not exist, Azir would be in the scaling for late game, Vladimir would be scaling for late game, and Annie would be in the big teamfight presence because her ultimate would be of that class or that category. So, here we have them. As I said in the beginning, there are champions here that you could argue belong in more than one playstyle. And there is also room to divide them into more playstyles, but I felt that simplicity is way better for everyone. I know that there are champions that are being played mid lane that probably did not show up in this list, and I'm always going to forget something or miss something. That's just the nature of these videos. And that's why I want you to let me know in the comments if I missed something, or if you think that I misplaced some champions. But that's going to be it for this list. We still have bot lane and supports to do, and those are coming later down the line. But for now I want to thank you all for watching, and if you found this video helpful, consider leaving a like on the video, and if you want to see more, don't forget to hit subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.